David Pogue on Apple's first 50 years. This is MacVoices. The MacVoices Dispatch is our weekly newsletter about all things MacVoices. From the week's shows to Chuck's other appearances to the week's best MacVoices magazine articles, the Dispatch keeps you up to date. Sign up now at macvoices.com/newsletter. Welcome to MacVoices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. Folks, it's my extreme pleasure to welcome back an old friend, old as in we've known each other a long time, not old as in we're old, David Pogue. David, it's great to see you again.
Thank you. And we're also old. We can say it.
Well, I'm sorry you are. I refuse to acknowledge it. It's just
older. There we go.
Yes. You've written a book about 50 years of Apple, which is kind of impressive. I went through it, and I know in the acknowledgments you said that it was your wife's idea, which has got to be a story in itself. But there's another question I want to ask, but should we give credit to your wife for this?
Absolutely. Yeah. I hosted a thing at the Computer History Museum for the Mac's 40th anniversary in Mountain View 2 years ago. And it was such an amazing event with all the old Mac guys coming back and tears and laughter and PTSD that my wife woke up in the middle of the night with a dream a couple weeks later and said, I have the best idea for a book. You should do a book about Apple's 50th anniversary. And sheepishly, I literally shut her down. I'm like, dude, that's come and gone. You missed that date. And we went back to sleep. But in the morning, I looked it up. And she was right. It was 2 years away. Just enough time to write a 600-page book.
Yeah, so it took 2 years to write this 600-page book. You were busy.
Yeah.
You were busy.
150 interviews.
Well, the thing I want to ask, though, the format of the book, it fascinates me because it's perfect for the history of Apple with all the anecdotes, all the little side pieces that you want to include that are so much a part of the history. And yet I don't know that I've ever seen a book written exactly like this.
I think you're right. I think it comes from years of writing how-to books, missing manuals, in that I wanted it to be a little bit nonlinear. I wanted you to be able to jump in anywhere. So as you've seen, there's hundreds of color pictures, each with its own caption. And then there's dozens and dozens of sidebars. These are little round-cornered boxes with a light blue background that are hilarious and amazing stories that are kind of zoomed in to a particular person at a particular moment that don't really belong in the larger flowing narrative of text, but they give you these snackable options to divert from the main text. My wife, Nikki, actually said they confused her because she didn't know what order she was supposed to read them. Like, is she supposed to stop reading the main text and then read the sidebar and then go back? Or is she supposed to finish the chapter and then go? There's no wrong answer.
And that to me is what is so great because, I mean, this is not a textbook. It's not a business book. I don't even know how to classify it because of that presentation, that you cover the history so well. You touch on all the characters, and boy, there were a lot of characters in Apple's history. And yet it makes me want to be able to pick it up and go through it no matter what mood I'm in. So it feels like it could be a coffee table book, a business book, and a textbook all meshed into one.
Yeah, I sort of see it as a story. You know, it's a great storybook. Apple's story, despite, everything we know about them now as just being huge, it is fundamentally the greatest turnaround story the world has ever known. I mean, when Steve Jobs was gone, they were 6 weeks from bankruptcy. I mean, they were burning through $50 million a month and not taking in any money. So they were about to they couldn't even sell. They were trying to get bought by anybody at bargain basement prices, and nobody would touch them. So Jobs came back, fired the board, fired the ad agencies, canceled all 50 Mac models, replaced the retail strategy. I mean, in a year, they had the iMac out and turned the company around to become profitable. In a year. I mean, this guy with no business training, did a semester of college. It's an unbelievable story.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up the iMac because that was one of the stories that I don't remember ever seeing. And the book is filled with that, things that maybe I knew but I didn't know or didn't remember or just never knew. But the story about how the iMac got its name and what Steve originally proposed.
Oh man, this was funny because I had multiple versions of this story from different people who were in the room. But the bottom line is that Steve Jobs loved Sony, and he loved the Walkman, and he loved the Discman, the two music players that had put Sony on the map. So he very much wanted to call the iMac the Macman. And his marketing bureau and Phil Schiller, his global head of marketing, were quietly aghast. And he said, "Well, if you don't come up with something better, we're going with Macman." And Ken Siegel, the guy from Chiat Day who ultimately came up with the names, told me that he came up with five candidate names and made posters of them, the whole thing. And Jobs hated all of them and said, "Give me more options." And came up with another five, but the name iMac just stayed through the running. And finally, one day, with no fanfare, they just said, "Okay, we're calling it the iMac." But thank God it wasn't the Mac Man.
Well, and the whole I thing, I mean, that's sort of where it started. And it has carried through for so long. So it was such a pivotal point in the history that it was kind of arbitrary. But Mac Man, I mean, where would we be if it had been the Mac Man?
And the iPod too. The iPod also is not a beloved name inside Apple. They just couldn't think of anything better. iPod, like Phil Schiller said, it sounded to me like some science fiction movie, like the Pod People.
Okay, so you must be reading my notes because the iPod is someplace I wanted to go in from the standpoint of the photos in the book. There are photos here that a lot of us will recognize, a lot of them that weren't. I'm not sure I ever saw a picture of the iPod, um, I guess, proof of concept, the yellow one that is in there. It's like, what is that?
Isn't that crazy? Yeah, one of the most fun things about doing this book was finding the photos and finding the photos of prototypes and products that never even saw the light of day. I mean, I maintain that there are more Apple products that you've never heard of than the ones you have because things get canceled at the last minute for all kinds of reasons. And Apple only reveals to the public things that it really thinks have a chance. But yeah, what you're seeing there was a really super crude board layout of what the iPod would be. It's this like tablet sized thing with all the circuitry inside and a scroll wheel and a teeny weeny little iPod screen, just to get the wiring correct. And it's fascinating to see the stages these things go through.
Well, and with all due respect to the Mac Neo Citrus, a yellow iPod at that time, it's wow. Okay, all right. You thought that was a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad those photos exist because otherwise we never would have seen them. I have a whole chapter, as you know, about the Apple car, the Project Titan that Apple spent 10 years and $10 billion developing, never saw the light of day. And they're much more careful about leaked photos of that. To my knowledge, there's not a single photo of that thing in the wild. But I did find a photo of one that the Titan project manager said looked almost exactly like it. It's kind of like a small Volkswagen, microbus, but shiny pure white, identical symmetrical front and back because it would have no steering wheel, no pedals. It's got four reclining seats inside that face each other. And it was to be a fully electric, fully self-driving car, like a living room on wheels, designed by Johnny Ive. So I would have liked to have seen it.
Yeah, yeah. To go back to the photos, though, I mean, that almost had to be as big an effort as writing the book to gather all these photos up, organize them, and decide what to include.
Now
I
you're
mean,
reading my notes. Yeah.
where did
Yes.
you get some of this stuff?
It was, I mean, it literally was almost as much work as the book itself. It's 360 photos. First of all, there's finding them. And second of all, there's getting the rights to them. And some of them, many of them were from the 70s and the 80s where nobody knows who the photographer was. So whose permission do I seek? Who do I pay uh, for the right? So it was exhausting. I did hire a magnificent photo editor, Crary Pullen. She was phenomenal. She knows every photo agency, every photographer, and she did remarkable work digging up some of these guys.
I will. It adds so much to the book because it wasn't just text. It was, you got a feel for it. You got a feel for the people, and how young they looked, especially those that have stuck around. And we know, we see them as we see them now, but back then it's like this was just a bunch of kids putting stuff together in an amazing fashion.
Yeah, that's right. Color printing is very expensive. So that's why almost every book you ever buy is in black and white, is because color just doubles or triples the cost. We had a particular problem because color books are typically printed in China, where color printing is much less expensive than it is here, and then shipped over by ship. But because of the tariffs, couldn't print this book in China. So it wound up being a $50 book. I mean, absolutely gorgeous in my opinion. And the full every page in color, printed in the U.S. But the publisher and I were both worried. They were like, "Who's going to buy a $50 book?" And first of all, it turns out Amazon has it for $35 right now. And second of all, the number of people who have complained about the price, zero. Not a single person has brought it up. I guess because, it is kind of a special book. It is very beautiful. It's substantial. Not quite a coffee table book, at least in size, but in magnificence, I would say, in its presence,
I would agree with that characterization because it is a no compromises book. To print those photos in black and white, it would have been fine, but it wouldn't have had the impact. So I
No.
think that's why there've been no complaints and why it's popular is it does not represent any compromises.
Well, clearly you have good taste. Thank you, Chuck.
So one other story I wanted to ask you about that I never heard before is the Mr. Macintosh story, because that seems so out of character for Steve Jobs.
I feel like a lot of things seem out of character for Steve Jobs. I feel like nobody's captured Steve Jobs. I mean, I read a 600-page book about Steve Jobs and still I didn't get any of his humor from that book. I didn't get any of his kindness from that book. Got plenty of, his viciousness, and that was a part of him when he was younger, especially. But I feel like there's a lot more sides to Steve. Yeah, so and one of them is this goofy streak that cracks me up. Steve, when they were developing the Macintosh, in 1983, Jobs burst into the office one day and he told Andy Hertzfeld and Bill Atkinson, I've got it. We got to have Mr. Macintosh. And they're like, what's that? And he goes, once every 1,000 times that you open a menu, there's going to be this little cartoon guy, like leaning against the wall of the menu, just looking out at you. He gives a little wave and then he disappears. And you'll try to get him back and you won't be able to because he only shows up once every 1,000 times. And I mean, just so weird and so quirky. And they tried. I mean, they had him drawn. In the end, the Mac was the ROM was so packed already, they didn't have room for it. But he survived. There's a drawing on him on the original Macintosh logic board. And there's another thing like that too. When the 1 millionth iMac was going to roll off the assembly line, Jobs got all psyched up about putting a golden ticket in the box. And whoever found the ticket in the 1 millionth iMac would win the iMac for free, a trip to Cupertino, and a tour given by Steve Jobs himself in a Willy Wonka costume. And he actually had the ticket made up by the graphics department. It was all set to go. I mean, just how weird and funny. In the end, the lawyers shut that down because in California, no purchase necessary is the rule for sweepstakes. And so it was not legal. But so quirky.
So were some of these things, I mean, some of this sounds more like Woz as opposed to Jobs. So was Jobs that affected by Woz, or do you think that this was just a part of Steve that we never saw? that never
It's a
got publicized?
it's a part of Steve that never gets mentioned. And the reason, so this my book begins with Woz because the story of Apple begins with Woz. He came up with this circuit board that we now call the Apple One, and then his friend Jobs said, "Hey, we should sell that." But those guys had been best friends for 5 years, 5 years before that. And one of the things that they bonded over, like Bob Dylan and girls and music, and one of the things they bonded over most was pranks. Both of them loved pranks. Woz's pranks, they should fill a book, I mean, by themselves. They just like one time when The Exorcist came out as a novel, Woz's mom read that book and she thought it was so evil that she walked to the end of a nearby dock and threw it into the water, threw it into the sea, never wanted to see it again. And when she told Woz, he went out and he bought another copy. He ran it under the faucet and he put it under her bedside table. He said, "I'm going to hell."
Yeah.
It's the greatest prank.
But that's it. And so, I mean, maybe Jobs had, well, obviously Jobs had a lot more of a whimsical side than anybody has captured. And maybe that's just because he's been elevated almost to this mythical status at this point,
Yeah,
deserved or not.
it's true. I think Andy Hertzfeld put it best. He said, any adjective you can use to describe a person, you could describe Jobs with. Like Scully told me that he thought Jobs was bipolar because he could go from, ebullient and joyous, and an hour later he'd be weeping, or screaming at somebody. So he was very volatile and mercurial.
Hmm. A serious question that, and I'm not even sure what the answer should be. What lessons did you take away after writing this book and getting sort of reviewing the entire history of Apple? And what lessons should we take away as readers?
I mean, there are a bunch of old companies, but I'm fond of pointing out that very few of them have the same mission statement they did when they were founded. Samsung used to be a dried fish vendor. Nokia was a paper mill. IBM used to sell computers. But Apple was founded with Woz's idea that computers, which were then technical and expensive and only in the realm of governments and corporations, computers should be in the hands of everybody. And it was a radical thought. Like in 1976, nobody had ever seen a computer up close. The thought that you would own one was radical. But that is still Apple's. I mean, I interviewed Tim Cook 2 weeks ago. He said that is still the mission statement. Take powerful, complex technology and make it available and simple and joyous for everybody. That was the mission then, that it's the mission now. So that was kind of startling to me. And the company's headquarters have never moved more than 2 miles from their first office. The other thing I would say is that every company claims to pursue excellence. But when you dig into Apple, I mean, the lengths they go to, it is an intense place. It is a deeply seated culture that is still infused with Steve Jobs. His ghost is in those halls. And they go to the most outrageous lengths to make things excellent. Like just one of many examples, when they wanted the Apple Watch to make sure that its calorie counting was accurate, Apple became the world's largest consumer of calorimeter backpacks. These are these backpacks with tanks on them, and then you wear there's a tube, and you wear an oxygen mask, and it measures your CO2 output in order to calculate the number of calories. And they rented apartments. They set up fake apartments and had people live in these apartments wearing the backpack mask things while they, ate and slept and worked and cooked. And they wanted to make sure that the numbers generated by this professional equipment matched what the watch was doing. So, I mean, just crazy lengths.
So why is it then that Apple seems to, and look, I admit, I may be biased, you may be biased. That said, why does it seem like Apple is always under such intense scrutiny? Since they've become such a large company, it's kind of obvious. But even throughout the history, it's just been, everybody wants to criticize Apple, second guess, third guess Apple. What is it about Apple that evokes those emotions?
That's a great question. I think one key reason is that, Apple does think different. Apple's whole thing is we're going to upset the status quo. We think everyone else has been doing it wrong. It's a little bit of a smug statement. It's a provocative statement, and a lot of people don't like it. I mean, a lot of people think that Steve Jobs was an asshole and deserved to be brought down a peg. So there's that element of it, and it's just I mean, I got my first Mac in 1984. They were selling them half price through colleges. And I remember, the Mac had 2% market share at the time, 2%. Windows was the other 98. And I just remember thinking, like, this is a David and Goliath story. I feel good about myself because I have taste. These machines are more beautiful and more thoughtfully designed than those cheap Windows crap. And there was a real cult-like tribal feeling to Mac people in the early days. I mean, the irony is now, Apple is the Borg. Apple has become the behemoth, but we still feel like a tribe. We still do feel like a little bit of an Apple cult. And it's fun. It's fun, but it does breed resentment in everybody else, especially when we were the 2% crowing about how superior our product was.
But we were right.
Yeah,
So,
it's true.
David, you are probably the only guy I can think of that could have possibly written this book, that could have gotten the access, had the credibility and the reputation to do it justice. And so I want to say thank you again for stealing a number of hours out of my life for writing this book that I have to sit and read and thoroughly enjoy. But thank you for doing this. You've done a real service, I think, to the business community and to the Apple community.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your very discerning review. And ultimately it was fun. Like, who wouldn't want to get to hang out with Johnny Ive and Steve Wozniak and John Scully? I mean, it was a joy to do the research. It was soul draining to write the book. I mean, I did not leave this desk for a year and a half. But ultimately, I'm very, very proud of it and happy to see it out there in the world.
You deserve to be. Thank you so much for the time. I know you're really busy because you're doing a lot of interviews to promote the book, but I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. It's great to see you again.
Thanks, man. You too. Great to see you.
Folks, I'm Chuck Joyner. This is Mac Voices. Go get David's book. That's all I need to say. Go get David's book. Until the next time, thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our Facebook group or like our Facebook page, and get more out of your Apple tech with Mac Voices magazine, free on Flipboard and on the web. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us through either our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/MacVoices or by making a one-time donation via the PayPal link on our front page and in the show notes of each episode. You will join these fine people who help bring you Mac Voices. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CashFly at cashfly.com.